All right, joining me now on Detroit Next is a former Detroit mayoral candidate and attorney, Anthony Adams. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's really a pleasure to have somebody who has actual experience running for mayor. We've just been kind of talking amongst ourselves with some of the candidates.
Yeah.
You've done this before, and that's kind of where I want to start. Tell us about what it actually takes to run for mayor of City.
Well, it takes first of all a tremendous amount of energy. Because the city, 138 square miles, so many different neighborhoods, so many different people to talk to. So you have to first come into this with a tremendous amount of energy. You also really have to have your strategic plan on how you intend to communicate with the people who you need to communicate with. I mean, obviously, you have established organizations and structures that provide you the opportunity to move in one direction, but you also have just a lot of people out here that aren't involved in organizations, and how do you attract them? How do you reach them? Where do you go? You also have to have really a strategic plan on what it is you want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And what you talk about can be what you want to talk about. It's got to be what the people want to hear. Oftentimes, candidates can kind of get caught in their own way and not really communicate with what people really want to hear. What are the bread and butter issues impacting the people who live in the city of Detroit? Because you've got different layers of people that you have to communicate with. You've got people at the higher income levels who have a certain need. You got middle income people, and you have people at the lower economic levels that still have to be communicated with, but all in a different manner. So having your strategic plan, understanding, what your win number is, how you get there, how do you utilize your time, and then how do you move across the city to communicate are all very, very important.
Set the stage for us a little bit about the importance of this race. People have been telling me that it feels like we're back in the 70s with like Coleman Young. It feels like a generational kind of race. The first time maybe things have been open in a long time, and any number of the candidates could be mayor.
Yeah.
Important time for the city. We talk a lot about that, so I won't kind of go into all of the city's problems.
Exactly.
But what do you see as kind of like the level of importance for this race?
Well, I mean, obviously, there will be a transition, there'll be a transformation, there'll be someone new in office, and that person will not come with the same cachet as the person who's been in that office. They won't have the same level of economic resources that the person who's currently in that office now. They won't have the same level of federal support. The issues that the city need to be addressed are a little different, but the core issues remain the same. How do you move the population forward? How do you provide for public safety? How do you restore faith and trust in the people in leadership, especially Black leadership, which took such a hit prior to Duggan being administered? Those factors are so important. How do you maintain the city's fiscal stability in a time where perhaps revenue opportunities won't be the same? All these are very, very important issues. And it is an important moment in the city because we are going back to Black leadership in this community, which is, quite frankly, has been needed for a long time. So you have a person in an office who will be in a position to set the stage to provide the leadership that the city will need.
There are 9 candidates who are running, 8 who are on the ballot, and 1 write-in.
Yeah.
All of the 8 candidates who are on the ballot are Black, so I think it's fair to assume we will have a Black mayor in Detroit, right?
It's fair to assume.
Unless something crazy happens. I've heard, a lot of excitement about that, as well as some concern that whoever it might be, a Black mayor might be treated pretty differently compared to Mike Duggan. And what does that kind of mean for Detroit's ability to do things?
That clearly is going to happen because the level of scrutiny that Black candidates and Black mayors gets is much more different. We were coming through a very difficult period when everybody wanted to paint a very positive picture of Detroit. And so to some extent, there was a concerted effort to suppress certain things that in the normal course of events would have been promoted more. But in order to tell the positive story of the rebirth coming out of the bankruptcy, the rebirth of the city, the phoenix, the city rising from the ashes, all was very, very important to tell a narrative and to create a picture that would make, obviously, investing in the city much more attractive to people who want to invest in the city. But those days will be over for the next person who goes in, and I think it'll be very important for that person coming in the door to really level set on exactly where the city is. Because there's some talk that maybe things aren't as good as they say they are. But I mean, the financials, from my perspective, look pretty good in terms of what they've been able to do. Obviously, they haven't had the same requirements of putting money or paying pensions. They've been paying into a retiree protection fund. They've been putting money away for, rainy day fund, park improvement, things of that nature. But now the things will change. That money will no longer be there. The grand bargain money will be evaporating. How is it going to look differently when someone's got to manage with a constrained resource environment that historically mayors have had to have and challenge with? So then it becomes important to understand the fiscal makeup of the city. What really is important? What do people in the city of Detroit really want from their mayor, the type of leadership that they want to see? Those will be the different things that will be reported on, because whatever promises candidates make, they will be closely tracked. And at the first 100-day mark, there'll be a 100-day scorecard to see whether or not that candidate has met their promises.
So in the mayor's latest and final budget, he talked about boosting up that rainy day fund and putting aside enough money that we'd be able to meet the pension obligation when it comes. But I've, like you said, I've heard a lot of concern from folks about how that's going to affect our budgets moving forward.
Right.
How much do you worry about that? What do you think the impact
Well,
will be?
the way that the budget is structured, you probably have a 3-year cushion before you really start to see major impacts fiscally on what's going to happen. I mean, for example, they were pretty conservative in estimating revenues over the last 4 or 5 years, which meant they always ended up with a surplus, which allowed them to then salt money away. How is that going to change now that you have a new contract in place with the police department? You have demands on the community in terms of what transportation needs to look like. You got the possibility now of major cuts in federal funding. How is that going to impact the city's ongoing budget? These are things that any incoming mayor needs to have an understanding of, and then have the right people around him to assist in advising him. The one issue I probably had with the last budget is I thought they should have probably parked away a little more money in the rainy day fund and the protection fund, because the more money you put in those funds, the less money you have to spend on an ongoing basis from your limited revenue stream that you're going to have. I think they could have did a little better job of that, and I saw absolutely no reason why the council themselves should have been increased their own personal budgets by $1 million. You're talking about $9 million when money could have gone to other things that have impacted the community. And when you talk about the changes that they made, well, in a $3 billion budget, making $28 million worth of changes is a drop in the bucket.
I think it was like 2% of the overall budget.
So, I mean, we're talking about how you save for tomorrow, because tomorrow will be coming and the resource allocations will be different.
I want to talk more about the city council boosting their own staff salaries, but that's more. I'll be reporting more on that.
Exactly.
We talked a little bit about some of the problems that the next mayor will inherit, but let's dive into that a little bit deeper. I mean, what is like the kind of approximate threats that they're going to have to take on?
Well, clearly the issue of public safety always is paramount in the minds of most people who live in the city of Detroit. What is that going to look like? I mean, obviously, you got some legislation in Lansing that allows you and provides you with some additional money to support some of the community initiatives. But how do you still really tackle the issue of crime and poverty in the city of Detroit? Because the two go hand in hand. And so when you talk about public safety, you also have to talk about poverty and how you impact that. And how do you begin to allocate resources to programs that will boost income, that will boost the training, that will provide levels of support for the people who live here, so that you aren't dealing with it on the back end, you're dealing with it on the front end. Again, another resource allocation issue. How do we address the issue of big development projects in the city of Detroit? A lot of tension in that area involving the use of tax abatements and tax captures. Does the community really understand what they mean, how they operate? I think there's been sort of a lack of education and informing people on how these processes move forward, what the realities of developing in the city of Detroit are, especially given the high tax rate structure that we have in our community. It's still the highest millage rate of any community in the state of Michigan, and probably almost in the nation. How can you fundamentally address that issue when most of the taxes that are being assessed on residents don't really deal with the city of Detroit? They deal with the Wayne County RESA, they deal with Wayne County Metro Park, Huron Parks. They deal with issues that really don't have an major impact in the city of Detroit. So then the question becomes, how do you better allocate resources that we're being taxed for to provide relief for the people who live in the city of Detroit? How do you really transform and create much more affordable housing that we need? There's been a lot of talk about numbers that have been thrown out there. But the reality is that if you look at reports that were done by the Detroit Housing Commission, they say that we need at least 100,000 units of affordable housing. How do we get there? What does that number look like, especially in light of cuts that are going to occur in the federal government? How do you begin to create the types of partnerships that you need in order to do that? How do you begin to continue to streamline the processes that the city uses to engage both business on the front end and internal business? All these things, and there are probably 10 other things that we could go through. I'm just kind of giving you a sample of when they talk about understanding how it operates. You have to understand at both a micro level as well as a macro level. And then you've got to have the leadership skills necessary to bring the right people to the table to do the job and set the vision. And then you got to go out there and court the business community, court the neighborhood people so that they understand that we're all in this together. We got to have a unifying message on how we bring ourselves together. We have to be unified. We have to be consistent. I'm not going to get everything that I need. You're not going to get everything you need. But if we both get enough of what we need, it makes it a little better for us. And then we can continue to work together because trust is the number one commodity I think that people need to have. Do I really trust you to do what you're supposed to do? In light of the history that people have seen on African-American leadership in our community.
Do you see a front runner in this race right now? We're recording this in mid-May. We've got quite a bit of time left in this race, but I think folks are starting to kind of look at separating, the real ones versus the not so real ones.
I think it's clear who the two front runners are. Reverend Solomon Kinlock, Mary Sheffield are clearly the front runners. They have the most momentum. I think there was a recent poll which, recently talked about how the numbers are changing dramatically. The other people have not been able to get the level of traction that they need in order to push themselves forward. And so as we move forward, I think people will begin to focus more and more on those two people as the candidates because they have the name, they have the money, and they have the resources necessary to push their message.
Name and money are very important in these races, I've learned.
Yes.
And so the recognition, you need money if you don't have the name recognition to get people to know who you are. As somebody that's run, in the past for mayor, how difficult is that? For somebody that's like, oh no, they're looking at this poll, they're like, we got a lot of ground to make up. How do campaigns actually do that? How do they get the attention that they need?
Well, obviously, unearned media is the best thing you can get because you don't have to pay for it. And the evolution of social media, has helped to a large extent, but still nothing is like pressing the fresh, having people out there who are working on your behalf, canvassing communities, phone banking, talking with people. All these things require a volunteer base that you definitely have to have, as well as the free resources, because you can't pay everybody to do everything. And then you can engraft upon that, telephone banking, text messaging. People tend to get too many text messages, so they tend to kind of screen that out. Social media, it's important. It's important for people to see it, but I don't necessarily think that it's the ultimate way to go because I believe that pressing the flesh is the most important thing you can do. But you can only press so many people, and you can only spend so much time doing that. So obviously, when I ran my campaign, I think we raised something under the tune of maybe $400,000, which is paled in comparison to my opponent who probably had $40 million. It seemed like, and did not have to work to get earned. He got a lot of unearned media because having a large PR operation to constantly push your issue and your agenda makes it much more easier. But for these candidates, they don't have that opportunity because they've got to go out and do it on their own, and makes it much more difficult. I mean, for someone who is at the lower end of the poll spectrum, they would have to spend upwards of $1 million to even create the level of name recognition. I mean, Sri Tanadar did it by spending close to $10 million to create the opportunity for him to run in the city of Detroit, which he was not from, because he had name of recognition and people identify with him. So there are a lot of things that you need. But if you got volunteers, it certainly helps. If you can raise money, it certainly helps. If you got support of outside, inside validators, it certainly works. And then you got to go out there and do the work. And you have to be genuine with the people who you're talking to. Because people in Detroit can detect the genuine nature of the candidates.
Yeah. When we talk about going out and pressing the flesh, I've heard in the past that candidates, because they have limited resources, will focus their time on higher turnout areas, and
Yeah.
they'll focus on the areas where they know people are going to come vote, basically, and that means that other areas are neglected, and
Right.
places where people haven't felt much attention from their elected officials might continue to feel that way if nobody
Yeah.
comes knocks on the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you approach that in your campaign, and what should these candidates be doing to, to boost turnout, to get more people engaged in this
Yeah,
election?
I mean, obviously, media attention certainly helps.
Mhm.
In this election, there will be a concerted focus of the media because there'll be someone new elected, so there'll be a much more higher media profile, which will also generate, I think, some level of turnout. But what I try to do, I try to twofold strategy. One is you got to focus on the people that vote. If we got a pool of 100,000 people that are just sort of the hardcore voters in Detroit, you would be foolish not to communicate with them. And
Mhm.
I'm sure all the candidates are doing what they do to communicate with that base. But if you can generate 5 to 10,000 additional votes from people who are not a part of that base, that gives you a tremendous advantage because especially in a primary like this, where it appears that you probably could get through the primary with maybe 40,000, 50,000 votes.
Mhm.
If you can get 50,000 votes, you probably would be at the higher end of the scale, given the fact that at least in the last election, you think you had somewhere around 75,000 people
Yep.
that voted in the primary and then creeped up to 100,000 people because this is a new election, a lot more eyes of attention. It probably will creep up to 120,000 people, 125,000 people, but that still leaves close to 350,000 people out there that are not being impacted. And how much resources you can devote to try to create those marginal new voters, because the more time and money you can do to that, the better off you'll be because you're increasing your chances of getting to a win number through the primary and ultimately to the general election.
Let's talk about some of the candidates. We don't need to start with anybody in particular, but I'm curious what you make of the qualifications of the field that we have to choose from, and if you see folks that are doing a better job of addressing the things that we've been talking about.
Well, I mean, obviously, we got a lot of people running, and each candidate brings with them their own unique set of circumstances. I mean, you've got three candidates that have been on city council, one candidate who has run citywide, so it kind of understands that that opportunity. Two candidates who are fairly, young in the political game, so to speak.
Mhm.
They bring a certain energy to the race. You've got an outsider, a newcomer who's never been involved in politics, kind of shaking things up, stirring from feathers in terms of his unconventional approach. You have a young guy who's an entrepreneur who has a lot of ideas, not necessarily any experience in this arena, but is bringing some new things. And you've got an older guy who ran last time with me, who I've seen on the campaign trail. So every candidate brings something different and unique to the race. And I don't diminish anybody's qualifications because I look at my own background. I mean, my background's probably different in that, I was a lawyer. I did clerk for a federal judge. I was an executive assistant to a mayor. I worked as a young associate in a law firm. I then was a partner in my own firm. I was of counsel to a large firm. I was elected to the Detroit Board of Education.
Mhm.
I was general counsel to the Detroit Board of Education, and I was deputy mayor. So I would expect anybody to have that level of experience because you got to be around a long time in
Yeah.
order to get that kind of experience. But they each bring something different, and I think it'll be up to the voter to decide what is it that they really want in their mayor. Are they looking for someone who is not tied to the politics of the past? That's very attractive to some. It's not to others. Are we looking for someone to continue to maintain what is going on? That's a big debate in the community as to whether or not the community really has benefited from what has happened in the city. Are we looking for someone who is not tied to the political elite? I mean, obviously in Detroit, you have a political elite. And you have people that are always in the game. You have a lot of people who are not in the game and feel that they've been left out of the process. What are people looking for and how are they going to communicate that message? And can I ultimately trust you when the doors close, when the cameras are on you? Can I really trust you to do what it is you say you're going to do? That's going to be very, very important.
Help me understand the influence of the churches in this race. You have Pastor Kinloch, who's at the head of a mega church organization, basically in Southeast Michigan. Council President Sheffield has family relationships to the church. She's a preacher herself.
Right,
Has been
right.
endorsed by a number of local pastors as well. It feels like if it's going to be between these two candidates, then this battle's really going to be fought, in the church pews. Is that fair? What do you think is
I
coming here?
think that over time that the Black church, the politics have been somewhat diminished because people kind of been questioning the leadership of a lot of the Black ministers in the city of Detroit. And as a group, have they ever been able effectively over the last 20 years to get anybody elected mayor? I mean, that's an open question. Obviously, Ken Lott brings it because he has such a large following and large impact. But it's not just the following; it's the fact that he's touched so many different people. Sheffield does have familiar relations. Her father is a pastor, and he uses his platform well to promote her candidacy, which is what you would expect. But at the end of the day, it's going to really boil down to how the candidates are themselves impacting people that are not inside of their congregation. Because if he's got, 100,000 people in Detroit that belong to, there's still 400,000 other voters that need to be touched. And you can't necessarily rely upon the people in your church to get you elected. You've got to go beyond that. And so each candidate has to weigh how important that is, how they solicit that support, because support obviously is important. But at the end of the day, it's what that candidate is going to do, how they talk to the people that they're talking to, and how people feel comfortable with what they're bringing to the table.
I think the churches are a way that candidates are able to get their message out. It's also a organizing vehicle. Everyone who comes up, for Sunday service could be somebody that could go knock on a door or tell a friend, what they heard about a candidate, and can be kind of boots on the ground for these campaigns.
Yeah, but a lot of churches, the memberships are being in decline. I mean, obviously, COVID had a tremendous impact upon attendance in churches. You pass by a lot of churches, you don't see necessarily the numbers, and obviously, a lot of churches have moved to their own digital streaming, so you really can't gauge how effective you're being in communicating your message. But at the end of the day, obviously, they are an entity. They need to be addressed. You can't ignore a block of voters under any circumstance. And I think each candidate will work their platforms to their advantage to ensure that their message is getting out.
Let's talk about the influence of the business community. So far, it seems like they are kind of waiting in the primary.
That would be an understatement.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that. I mean, is that abnormal for these races?
For this race, it's tricky because you've got two candidates that are still sitting on council and they still have votes on things that are happening.
Yeah.
So obviously they aren't going to just throw their money and not donate, because they have to do something, because they have pending deals that are impacting them. But the big corporate money we have not yet seen, because we know what that looks like. It looks like ads being run by C4 PACs that are promoting their candidacy, and we have not seen that level of corporate investment. And I think the corporate community is hedging their bet. They want to see one who comes to the primary and then get a gauge on where they stand relative to their community support, and then move forward with how they intend to invest their money. And no candidate wants that money against them. But I think that candidates that have the ability to independently raise money outside the corporate community have a distinct advantage, because they can say that they aren't necessarily tied to the corporate interests. But you have to understand that business is very important. That business has to be maintained. And that's the balance between people understanding, can I trust you to really negotiate on my behalf when you go behind closed door when I can't see you?
What's the impact of those ads once we start to see them, as somebody that maybe was drowned out a little bit?
Yeah, drowned out was an understatement. Well, what you'll see is that, again, more eyes to the party, because the more attention that you bring to the race, the more people we will get to vote. I mean, the last really hot contested race would have been really, Benny Napoleon and Mike Duggan. That was a hotly contested race. But Kilpatrick and Freeman Hendricks was a hotly contested race. A ton of money spent. I think probably about $14-15 million spent in that race to get the voter turnout over maybe 180, 190,000. To get that kind of turnout would be phenomenal, because then it signals that people are actually really want to be engaged. and that have not been engaged to the level that they need to be in order to be effective in moving the types of numbers that we need to get to.
So when Mike Duggan came into office, he was able to pull a lot of people from his past jobs, at various levels in the hospital, the county, and so on. We could be here all day listening to
Yeah.
And he put those people in positions at the heads of departments and
Right.
in his cabinet so that he had a really kind of qualified base of professionals to work for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard some concern for folks about what the next mayor will have to do to build up their staff, and especially with the loss of pandemic relief money, which I think has created some 400 jobs for the city that could go away with that money. I think some of them are being rolled back into the city, but we won't be able to pay for all of them.
Right.
So what I want to ask you about is how candidates should be assembling their team of people that will be running these departments, how they bring qualified people, in on that work, and the importance of all of that as somebody that was chief of staff.
Well, there is no shortage of talent, let me say, in the city of Detroit. And there are a lot of people with talent that have not been included in the process because they weren't politically connected to the politics of the city of Detroit. So I'm not really concerned about the talent level, because the talent level in our city does exist. People need to understand that we have very talented people here who live in the city of Detroit that can actually do the job. I think part of it is that because we will be undergoing a transition, there will be a transition period. Well, obviously, you don't come in and just throw everything out the window. That would be foolish, because you've got systems in place. You need to better understand how those things operate. And so any experienced leader would bring people on board sort of in stages. Obviously, you've got the central office of the mayor. He needs to have his key people that he trusts, and people who have administrative experience at running high-level systems, because the city of Detroit is a high-level social service economic development entity. You have to have people who have experience on the ground and boots on the ground. If you got experience in that system, it's even good, but being in the ability to be smart and understand systems is very, very important. And then you undergo your transition, because you have an election mandate as to what your vision is. And how do you select the people necessary to fulfill your vision? Where do they go strategically within the organization? How do you transform an organization that is a very large structure? How do you reduce that structure so that you can provide more direct service to the people, which means people that you hire need to be able to take on much more responsibility than the people that are. Do you still need a large PR operation as a part of that structure? That's an open question, because if you're talking about direct service, the more money that the mayor's office doesn't spend, the more money you have to spend on community initiatives. What is your relationship with the community in terms of how you structure that entity? How does that look? Who do you have there? People with experience, people who people trust. Detroit is a large city, but it's a small city, and people trust people. How do you build upon the trust? How do you get the confidence of the people? How do you have some successes so people can understand things can move forward? It's going to be very important walking in the door for people to have a comfort level to know that, one, I understand that we don't necessarily need to blow this system up. There surely are some things that need to change. There surely is more community engagement and involvement that we need to have. People clearly need to understand the big development process. How do we transform our workforce development so that we can access more career skills, opportunity for people who live here? How do we work better with the Detroit Public Schools so that the programs and things that they provide, we can integrate that into a model that allows us to uplift the people who live here? Those are the kind of things that the next person who's coming in need to understand and need to be in a position to give people comfort that if I've run something large before and I've been successful, then maybe I can duplicate the same thing. I mean, that was Mike Duggan's thing. I fix things. So now the next person says, not only can I fix things, but also can elevate what needs to be done in our city.
How important is it for those department leaders, people on high-level positions in the city, our Detroit residents? Because we've seen, a number of them have been recruited from around the country. Yeah. Some of them continue to be in those positions while not living in the city, and people have been frustrated about that.
Yeah, and I mean, that, to me, I think you got to live in the city. I mean, I just believe that if you live here, then you have a much different take. It's not to say that people at those levels are professionals and they're there to do a job and they do what they have to do. But obviously, to me, if you live here, it makes it a little easier. You don't have as far to drive in order to get someplace. You kind of hang out in the places. I'm on the east side, I hang out on the east side.
Mhm.
I go to the different restaurants and locations on that side of town. I think it's important. Um, but obviously, if you've got someone who has exceptional talent, then you have to get the people who you need to get. But at the end of the day, it certainly helps if you live here in the city of Detroit.
We think about some of the changes in the department structure that Duggan led. He reformed, or I think reconstituted, the Department of Neighborhoods.
Yes.
He created the Office of Sustainability and Mobility,
Yeah. Yeah.
and probably some others that I'm forgetting. You talked about how he really boosted up the communications department and
Right.
created a
Right.
much stronger kind of PR team around the city. And there's been talk among the candidates about creating new offices as well, like offices of gun violence, safety in neighborhoods. There's discussion of a small business office and things like
Sure.
that. So it's something candidates are talking about. But I want to know from you, like, what what should the next mayor be thinking about in terms of like reconstituting some of these
Well,
departments or building new
when you
ones?
start thinking about that, you have to break it up into different segments. For example, when you talk about sustainability, well, obviously we have a Detroit Water and Sewer Department and the Department of Public Works, and so maybe those things should be integrated. We don't need new departments. We have departments that already serve a function that needs to be integrated and maybe modernized. When we design our streets, how we use our parks and rec. For water runoff. Those things can be effectively integrated into existing departments so that you don't create additional costs for yourself. Because again, every time you create something new, the money's got to come from someplace else. And so how do you better manage and streamline the processes that you already have to address the issues that you need to address? There certainly needs to be more coordination and overarching neighborhood development. How does that look? How do people communicate? Because you just have to run to the mayor's office to get your project done. The process is supposed to work as a process is supposed to work, is to move things through, not with the heavy hand of the mayor always pushing things. Because if it's a project that's a go, then it should move through the system, and we need to be doing what we need to do. And so I think oftentimes candidates want to talk about the new bells and whistles, but the question is, how do you integrate that within existing structure? If there is no department that serves that need, well, then maybe you should create something new. But if there's water and sewer infrastructure, which relates to flooding, public lighting, public safety, how do they all work together? How do we make sure that the system itself works effectively? That should be the goal, because the ultimate object is to provide the highest level of service to the people in the city. Entrepreneurship is big because we've got to create more entrepreneurship in the city of Detroit. How do we create entrepreneurial zone so that if you live on the east side and you go past Alta Road and East Jefferson, you got a lot of vacant buildings on that area. How do you create a spot for entrepreneurs to say, this is where entrepreneurs need to go? Come with your idea. Tell me what you want to do. Tell me what your business plan is. What's your skin in the game? Creating the opportunity for people to work in neighborhoods to create the types of sustainable things that people need to get: fresh food and vegetables, restaurants, clothing, shopping. All these things have to work in concert. So we've got to figure out how to streamline what we do, not necessarily creating a lot of new things, but make the things that we have work much more effectively for the people we need to attract. Because we've got several issues. One, we have to continue to retain the people who live here. I mean, even though the loss of population has slowed, we still need to maintain the people who live here. What does that look like? It's a different thing for people who live in Sherwood Forest versus a different thing for people who live in Jefferson Chalmers.
Mhm.
What does that look like? How do you grow a city if you don't have a strong school system? You cannot grow a city of Detroit if you don't have strong schools. What does that connection look like? Not mayoral control, but how do they work together hand in foot to make sure that if I have a neighborhood where I have a large population of children, then how do I structure my programs and then provide the opportunity for kids to walk safely to school? These are the types of things that, we did when we were growing up. We might walk 3 and 4 miles to school. People would be terrified to let their kid walk a half mile, in certain areas in the city of Detroit.
Mhm.
So how does that look like? Job training and skill advancement. Where does that really take place? If I got a parent in a household that doesn't have skills who's bringing this kid to school, well, maybe there should be an extension program for the parent to go to school along with the child. There's a lot of different things that the new candidates can really I think create a model of opportunity for people who live in the city if they have the vision and courage to do what's necessary.
Well, it sounds like you got a pretty good pitch. You thinking about running for
No,
anything else?
no. My elected days are over. But I mean, when you love the city of Detroit and you see the opportunity, I think oftentimes people have to look beyond what is and see the future on where it's heading. How do we integrate AI technology into what we're doing? How do we use the skill sets of the people who live here to do these types of things? Because you have enough things to maintain in the city of Detroit. You got infrastructure, you got park systems, you have water runoff availability, you have mobility issues. How do we begin to integrate that so that if there's enough opportunity for people to live and work safely in the city of Detroit, then that's what we should be doing.
So the next mayor also is going to have to navigate relationships with various authorities, which have kind of gained control of different assets of the city and infrastructure of the city. Think of like the Great Lakes Water Authority, which had to work with the city when a water main broke in Southwest and flooded a whole neighborhood. And people were kind of like, whose responsibility is this? Wait, who you should have done? So I don't know. Talk about how the next mayor has to navigate these authorities that kind of supersede some of their ability to do things.
I would say that they don't necessarily supersede the ability because they obviously have appointees on each of these authorities. When you look at Great Lakes Water Authority, obviously it was a takeover of the system. I know some people don't like to hear that, but that's what happened. The valuation of what the city is getting paid from GLEWA leaves a lot to be desired because I think it left tremendous shortfalls in the city in terms of its ability to improve its own infrastructure. But that being said, these are working partnerships. And the new mayor has to understand the ability to work in partnership with these organizations to make sure that the needs of our community, we are still the largest customer base in large extent in the city of Detroit with GLEWA. What's the relationship with Detroit Economic Growth Corporation? Well, that is controlled by the mayor. And make no mistake about it. Council may have some appointees. At the end of the day, they control that. So that's a relationship that people need to understand. He can impact to certain things. How do you work with the stadium authorities to ensure that the workers are being paid properly in those entities? Because a lot of people who work in these authorities don't necessarily make the types of wages that they should or to have a living wage. So they have to have the ability to maximize their understanding of where these things fit in. You got the Detroit Wayne Port Authority, which actually has the ability to do development in the city of Detroit. Where's the best time opportunity for that to be? You've got the Riverfront Conservancy. Maybe they should be taking more responsibility for the park system throughout the city of Detroit, since they get a huge funding from the private philanthropic community. Maybe that's a safe place for them to be. I think the mayor's got to figure out where these entities fit into his overarching philosophy. How can he use them to best move his agenda forward? Make sure that he puts the right people in place at these authorities to provide the level of oversight they need to do, and then hold them accountable. That's his ability. That's his hold card. So there's no authority that impacts the city that he doesn't have the ability to impact. The people just have to understand, this is what I need you to do when you're talking with Great Lakes Water Authority. They need to make sure that our basements aren't being flooded, and then when something happens, we get quick service.
To talk about another authority, the Land Bank Authority.
Yes, we got to talk about that.
There's a big question mark, I think, around the future of that entity. Several of the folks that are running for mayor want to basically bring those services back into the housing department and kind of end the land bank. Not sure when exactly that would happen, but they see that as being maybe short or long term, the future of that. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it's all about how we manage the land that we have and the assets and resources that exist in the city. And to suggest that they don't have as much authority as they do, I think, quite frankly, is political speak, because if it's impacting what's going on in the city of Detroit, you as a person at the table have the ability to impact what they do. So I don't buy necessarily that argument. There should be much more coordination and direction. Land needs to be freed up and given to some people in the city of Detroit. If you live in the area and you've maintained your home and you've paid your taxes and there's vacant land, you should be able to get that land at no cost to yourself. Because you've lived there, you've invested in the community. So how do we make those processes work better for the people who need to be impacted by them? I think by law, I think that the land bank is set to sunset. There might be a sunset provision in the law on how they were supposed to operate. And if that sunset occurs, then they need to have a plan on how they're going to integrate. And what are they going to do differently? It doesn't make any sense to roll back in what's not working that it needs to work. Tell me what needs to work. Tell me how we need to do what we need to do so that we can free land up for the people who live in the city of Detroit. That's how you create generational wealth. Ownership of land, redevelopment of housing. There's a lot of different things that can be done. If people really have the foresight to force the issue on what it is that they really want to see. What do you really want to see from the land bank? What do you want to see from an entity that controls economic development in the city of Detroit? How is that going to look? How the process is going to be streamlined? And then who's going to make it happen? Because people want things to happen. At the end of the day, they want a government that works for them, that does what they need for it to do. If there's a vacant house on my street that needs to be taken down, it needs to happen. If there's a vacant house that can be redeveloped, if you got a plan to redevelop that, I'm all ears. How do we make it work for ourselves? People who are invested in our city, we need to take care of them first.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, Mr. Adams. Thank you so much for being on Detroit Next. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Detroit Next is a community-led project from Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different, which means that we can't do this work without you. We need your support. If you have a question or a comment and want to participate in this process throughout the year, give us a call. We have a phone line set up at 313-284-6407. Leave us a message and we'll play it on the podcast. If you like what we're doing, head to bridgedetroit.com and subscribe to our newsletters. All of that content, again, is free, no paywalls for anybody. We're trying to make this as accessible as possible. Head to our YouTube channel to get full episodes and interviews along with extra content throughout the year. You can also find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and DetroitNext.podbean.com. We're going to be doing this all year long, so stay with us. Follow Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different on your favorite social media platforms and take this ride with us. Thanks.